Hello, this is Dean Radin, and I'm on Your Superior Self.
Hi, I'm Anita Murjani, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hello, this is Dr. Raymond Moody, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, Cultural Creatives. I'm Bruce Lipton, and I'm here to join you with Your Superior Self.
This is Paul Selig, and this is Your Superior Self.
What's up, everybody? I'm Aubrey Marcus, and this is Your Superior Self.
Hi, this is Dr. David Salomon, and you're living your superior self.
I love that. That's perfect, man. Nobody's ever said that before. Doc, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you tonight?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. Doing well tonight, doing well.
Yeah. Any classes today? Any teaching?
Yeah, we're finishing up the semester, so we're in the midst of finals and gearing up for the end of the year activities, commencement. Mm-hmm. And I've got a study abroad trip that's going to the UK right after commencement. So a lot of planning.
That is. Let me ask you this. So I'm in college. I'm going back for psychology. Why do you guys always wait until the last month and then you guys just pile it on top of us? I just want to.
It's not intentional. I mean, I try not to do that in my teaching. I try to actually front load things more than back load them. But it's tough. I mean, because in most classes, you're kind of building, and then by the time you get to the end of the semester, it all sort of comes to a climax.
Yeah, it comes out of left field.
Yeah.
So let's dive into your story a little bit here. Like, how did you get to where you're at? I mean, it's very interesting. I love this. I love the dynamics of this. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about it?
Absolutely. Sure. So I grew up in the Bronx, New York. I was raised a sort of a cultural Jew more than a religious Jew. Although I did eventually was bar mitzvahed from an Orthodox synagogue. But it was more that that was the synagogue that was in our neighborhood than it was that we were Orthodox. We were not. And those experiences really affected me greatly, which I talk about in the opening to the book. I went on to college, started at Fordham University, good Jewish boy at a Catholic university. And the Jesuits really influenced me greatly. Ended up eventually going on to graduate school for a Ph.D. And my work has been in medieval and Renaissance literature, religion, and culture. I was a professor of English for about 25 years, various colleges, and then came down to Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia, 5 years ago to open up their Office of Undergraduate Research and Creative Activity. And I still teach courses here in our honors program and in museum studies, and continue to do my research and my writing.
So a ton of reading.
A lot of reading. Always a lot of reading. I ran a bookstore in the 80s, and that's probably where it started. And so my book collection is vast and varied. I read all over the place.
I see the background. That's not like a real background.
That's a Zoom background.
For those who can't see, there's just a mountain of books behind them.
Yeah, no, that's a Zoom background. But
it's probably your library.
Yeah. It's not that different. Yeah. It's I really relish books and reading and just receiving new knowledge and getting new insights from a wide variety. So, people come and they look at my book collection and they'll say, wow, I mean, one shelf has got things on science and another shelf has got things on, Greek philosophy. So,
I love, and this, I don't know why, I love the smell of books. Like when I'm reading it, like I have to smell it. Like, I don't know what that is, but it's like, I hold it. I have to hold it. I don't like getting like PDFs of books. Like when people,
neither do I.
When authors pitch their books to me to review or talk on the show, I'm like, I need to hold something because I need to write in the margins. I need to take notes. I need to smell it. I need to smell that knowledge.
Well, I mean, reading is a sensual experience. It always has been. I mean, even going back to and we can talk about, various forms of meditation and prayer that involve books. I can remember watching the men in the synagogue when I was a kid, and when they prayed, they daven, we call it in Yiddish, and it's a rocking back and forth. It's a physical experience. And so there is something that's very sensual about reading a book, I think, that you don't get from reading on a Kindle or an iPad.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like maybe deeper moments of flow, maybe. I don't know.
I think so. And there's also something spatial about it, though. As you say, I mean, writing notes in the margins. And oftentimes, I won't remember where something was in a book in particular, but I know that I made a note, and I'll know that it was in the lower right quadrant of the page. And so I can flip through looking for that. You can't do that with an electronic file.
What's your most prized book?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. It's a great question, though. I have a copy of Milton's Paradise Lost, which I bought in a Barnes & Noble annex in New York City, probably in 1982 or 3. I think it cost me $5. It was stamped as is, and it was a numbered edition. It's very nice. It's one of a set. I'll never find the rest of them, but I don't care. It was one of those things that I when I found it, I just thought that I found the Holy Grail, and I've kept it ever since.
That's awesome. Well, we were talking earlier and how we both didn't really like reading until a certain point in our lives. Yours was college. What was the book that kind of lit that fire?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I mean, I started college. I wanted to go to law school originally. I was a political science major. That's all I ever wanted to do through high school. And I got to college at Fordham University and took a bunch of general education courses, and took my introduction to political science courses, and was bored out of my mind. And the summer after freshman year, I interned at a law firm, and I hated it. And so I came back the fall of sophomore year and basically woke up and said, well, now what the hell am I going to do? Because that was all I had ever thought of. And, just by luck, I was registered for a general education course that we all had to take. It was called Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton. We read a good bit of the Canterbury Tales. We read 4 Shakespeare plays, and we read Milton's Paradise Lost. And I had never been exposed to any of that before. I mean, I'd read some Shakespeare in high school, but I didn't get it. And I was really intrigued by all those texts, but it was when we got to Paradise Lost, which is a 17th century epic poem that retells the fall of man, that just, I don't know what happened, but the light bulb went on, and I went, oh my God, this is just absolutely incredible. And I mean, I combed through the footnotes in the edition. I actually carried around with me a little portable dictionary, which I still have to this day, in my backpack, because I would look up words that I didn't know, because Milton used so many words that he actually invented. And so I would look up words and as you say, gloss in the margins and write things down. I still have that edition that I used when I took that course. And after I did that, I realized that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I basically took time off from college. I wouldn't say that I dropped out. I always intended on going back, but I took time off, and I had the bookstore then in the 1980s, and read just everything I could get my hands on. It was just crazy. And having the bookstore was just the most incredible thing, because literally,
own a bookstore.
Well, things would come in boxes, and I would open the boxes and look at the books and go, well, this looks interesting. And so I was just reading just completely willy-nilly. There was no rhyme or reason to it. But, as I like to tell my students, eventually you kind of get to a point where the people that you're reading kind of refer to each other, and you kind of know, okay, I'm in the zone here. I'm in the right place. And that's eventually what happened. And so when I went back to college, I decided, it was really sort of lunacy that I'll be an English major. There was no rhyme or reason as to why. I'm the only person in my family to have gone to college, and never mind on to graduate school. I had no idea what I would do with an English degree, and ended up as a Ph.D. and it's been my life's work so far. So yeah,
that's so interesting. What I've never read Paradise Lost, right?
Yeah.
Can you dive into that a little bit? Like,
sure.
What was it about it that just?
It's very difficult. very difficult poem. Probably one of the greatest poems in the English language. It is an epic poem. And what Milton set out to do, as he says in the opening lines, is he wanted to justify the ways of God to man. He wanted to try to explain why God does what he does to man. And the way that he goes about telling that story is to essentially retell the story of the fall in the Garden of Eden, of the creation of the world and the fall. And it's just absolutely amazing what he does with the characters and the backstory that he creates for them, and the internal soliloquies and thoughts that you hear of characters like Satan, to hear why he's doing what he does and how he's conflicted. I just was absolutely blown out of the water. And I think it's why eventually I have now become very interested in the writing of St. Augustine. I've been studying Augustine now for probably about 20 years. Augustine is really at the base of Paradise Lost. It's Augustinian theology that really is behind a lot of what Milton's doing. But I mean, I read the poem, and as I say, I mean, I combed through the footnotes. I remember it was the Merit Use edition, which is completely outdated now. And he kept mentioning in the footnotes this thing called Dante's Divine Comedy. I'm like, what the heck is that? I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. And so I went to the bookstore in New York City, went downtown and picked up a used copy of it to see what it was about and read it. Same thing happened with Spencer's Fairy Queen. He mentioned that in the footnotes. And so I went to Gotham Books on 47th Street, one of the great bookstores in the history of this country, which sadly is now gone, and said, do you have this thing called The Fairy Queen by Spencer? And they gave me the Yale edition of The Fairy Queen. It was about 1,000 pages long, with endnotes. And I started reading through The Fairy Queen. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I was really just scattered. And I had no one to guide me, which in a way I think was a good way to do it. Looking back on it, I eventually, of course, had some teachers who kind of helped me figure out, okay, this is what you should be doing. I mean, I remember so vividly being in a used bookstore with a poetry professor of mine. And it was always great going to these bookstores with him because he knew all this stuff that I didn't know. And so he literally would grab things off the shelf, stick it in my face and say, you got to read this. And one of the things he did that with was a book by Susan Sontag called Against Interpretation. And I still have that copy, which cost me, I think, 25 cents. It's an old copy from the 1960s. And it was brilliant. He was right. I mean, I had to read that. But I probably would never have come up in a course. And I would never have done it if I didn't have that kind of guidance. And so the significance, and you know this as well, I know as being a student and being as well educated as you are at this point, the importance of finding good mentors who can just guide you in so many different ways, intellectually, personally, spiritually, right? I mean, we've all had probably those. And if we haven't, it's something that we certainly, I think, really should search out. It enriches your life.
Well, being a mentor to the audience right now, like, where would you point them if they're just starting out on their path to spirituality, or just kind of like yearning for intellectual food, right? Where would you point them to kind of start those gears turning? Yeah,
I mean, there are places that I would point them to, but they might not be the places that everyone would go. But if somebody's setting out like that, one of the first things, and I can't tell you how many copies of this book I've given to students over the years. It's a book by Alan Watts called The Wisdom of Insecurity. Alan Watts, the infamous teacher of Buddhism, recorded incredible lectures in the 1970s, which still air on NPR stations. You can listen to them, and wrote, I don't know how many books, and just really accessible books. I mean, what he was trying to do was really to write about Buddhism for the West, because Buddhist theology, Buddhist philosophy is so really antithetical to most of what the West is about. And it was a time in my life when I was really struggling. And I had the bookstore, and there was a copy of it on the shelf, and I was like, "Oh, what the heck is this?" I'd never even heard of him. I don't know who he was, but the title seemed intriguing, and it is a book which really teaches you to it teaches you, as the title says, the wisdom of insecurity. So the importance of letting go, the importance of just being with yourself instead of just always yearning and reaching for something, right? I mean, one of the Four Noble Truths is that desire is suffering, and really that's what's behind a lot of it.
Why do you think it's so hard for us Westerners? Is that because of that desire aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, we are capitalists, we are materialists, and we have a completely different perspective about spirituality than most in the East do. And when I've taught courses in Western and Eastern religions, it's really easy to lay out those distinctions, right? I mean, in the West, the divinity is external to us. We pray to God in Judaism, Islam, Christianity.
What is that, divine command theory or something like that?
Yeah, well, yeah. And in the East, in most Eastern philosophy, God is within. You meditate, you pray within. And so the attitude is more like, you want to change your life, look inside and change your life. Whereas in the West, we pray to God and ask for things. So it's a very different perspective. And I think that it's very difficult for those of us who have been raised in the West to understand what that kind of thinking is like. And I don't pretend to. I mean, I jokingly call myself a Judist because I was raised Jewish, and I've become more Buddhist as I've grown older. But I don't even begin to claim that I understand 1/10 of what Buddhism is all about. It just I don't. I continue to read, and you can read things that are more on that kind of entry level, which are more accessible, like Alan Watts' work. And then you can get into, the really deep teachings of some of the great Buddhist teachers, which are just very difficult to read because you read them and they don't make rational sense. Mm-hmm. And in the West, we are rational. Mm-hmm. We're rational thinkers. We want explanations. We want reasons why. And a lot of what the East teaches is that, there may not be a reason why. It's not rational. Mm-hmm. Some of it is to just go with intuition, to go with what your spirit tells you to do. Yeah.
I really enjoy, I just started picking up Thich Nhat Hanh's material. And
just passed away.
Yeah. And I hate to say it, like, that's probably like, he just recently came into my awareness. Maybe it was because of his passing.
Yeah.
But,
great writer.
Oh,
yeah.
Unbelievable. Right.
Yeah.
And it isn't hard for a Western mind to pick up his, his methods or his philosophy. It's very like his thoughts on anger have really helped me, especially with
that
healing.
That book is terrific, isn't it?
Healing, generational healing. Like, because you're right, because Westerners, like, we put those the divine command theory where God is outside of us, or our gods are outside of us, external, like we're trying to be perfect for them so that way we earn our way into heaven, where the East is very much into going inward and being what it is that you want to be. It's interesting because you teach a course on heaven, right? Heaven and hell. I
teach a course on heaven and hell. Yeah, I teach a seminar on heaven and hell. And we kind of go through and trace the development of the ideas of heaven and hell, going back to pre-Judeo-Christian thought, and then following it through historically and bringing it right up to the contemporary, to the modern world. And it's interesting. It's interesting for me as a professor to teach that course. But the most interesting thing to me is the students' reaction to it, because a lot of students come into that class and some other classes that I teach as well and think, oh, well, I know all this stuff already. And then, we really start to look at it, and they start to say, wait a minute, I didn't know that. One of my favorite things when I used to teach philosophy, when I started out my career as a professor, and I used to teach an intro to philosophy course, which was a very popular course on campus, but it was also very, very difficult. And I would always have a student come in about the third, fourth week of the semester, come to my office and say, "Wow, this class has really given me a run." And I'm like, "Well, what's up?" And they'd say, "Well, it's nothing like I thought it was going to be." And I said, "Well, what did you think it was going to be?" They said, "Oh, philosophy." They thought it was going to be, burning incense and my office would be filled with tapestries. And they would say, the things that we're discussing are really challenging me to challenging all the things I believe. And I would sit there and sort of pause and say, well, that's a good thing, right? Because if your beliefs stand up to the challenge, they'll become stronger. And if they can't stand up to the challenge, you need to re-examine the beliefs. And that's really what spiritual growth is all about.
Sure. I'm trying to get out of the belief system. I'm trying to go on experiences. What is my experience really? Right? Because I grew up in Christianity, and a lot of that is fear-based. It's you got to be perfect. There are, don't sin, right? And if you do sin, repent. And if you don't accept Jesus as your savior, you're going to hell. And as I grew up, it just never felt right to me. It just felt like it just never resonated, because we are naturally sinners, right? In the eyes of, in God, right? We're natural. Adam and Eve, for example, right? Like we were born of that. With what is it? The Catechism talks about original sin.
Yes.
That everyone's born with, regardless, right? Like this beautiful, precious baby is a sinner, essentially, until it's baptized or whatever the process is. But to me, it's just experiencing my own life and experiencing my own consciousness and seeing what feels good, what feels bad, and like going inward and seeing the conditioning and seeing how my body reacts to different things because of that conditioning, and trying to understand, what is the trauma that's inside? Why am I reacting this way? Like, my consciousness is only like this small compared to everything else. Like, my heart is pumping by itself. What is that? Is it the unconscious part of myself, the self that, Jung talks about?
Right. But although your consciousness is just that little bit, as you say, and that was where I was going to go with that, Jung would say it's part of the collective unconscious, which is much bigger than any of us, right? It's more eternal, and it will live on after us. And what we are doing is just sort of taking a little piece of that for our physical existence. And so that Jungian journey, which is so important, I think, and which I write quite a bit about, the process of individuation, which is what Jung calls it, it's just, it is really, I think, at heart what makes us human beings. If you aren't engaged in that journey, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, you're not doing any. I mean, what you're doing is you're trying to be something that you're not naturally. You're going against everything. And for me, and I don't know if this is true for you or not, but for me, it just never felt real. It felt like it was synthetic. It just felt like I wasn't living to my full potential. And then when I accept that different type of thinking, like becoming more aware about spirituality and what it is, it's experiencing of one's being, of myself, of my consciousness, that opened it up to allowing me to feel more inside of my body, to feel more into who I am, my thoughts, my thought patterns, why I do certain things. Ultimately, we all are just a collection of experiences and thoughts and what people have said. Even that voice in my head, I call it the ego, the personality, but how much of that is just what I've been told over my life, right? Like the recordings.
I think, spirituality is very personal, whereas organized religion is very impersonal. And for a lot of people, I think they really struggle with that. It is I think there is a way for folks to be able to blend the two. But I think for a lot of people, of particular generations, particular thinking. That's a real struggle. And so they break away from the organized religion and really just go into the personal spirituality and think about, well, what is that? In many ways, we see this starting on a cultural level in the 1980s when what we used to call New Age religion became a big thing, right? We had sections for New Age in the bookstore that had all these books on New Age religion. And New Age religion to me was basically just a smorgasbord, right? It was, I like this idea in Christianity, and I like this from Buddhism, and you're sort of just making a personal spirituality. And for some folks, I don't think they can do that because they need organized religion for the discipline part. That journey that we're talking about taking, that personal spiritual journey, is not easy. It is not an easy journey to take. And I think for some folks that they steer away from it because it can be very, very difficult, can be incredibly painful. Jung has us confronting the shadow self at one point, right? You've got to confront the negatives that are a part of who you are. And that can be just incredibly ugly and painful. But if you can do that, and if you can reconcile yourself with your shadow self, you can then move on and you can use that. But I think that for many people, it's just too frightening. They can't do it. The classic scene that illustrates that is from The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars film, when Luke has to go into the cave. So he's training with Yoda. I don't know how much of a Star Wars fan you are. He's training with Yoda, and he senses there's a cave, and he senses that he needs to go into the cave. And Yoda tells him, you won't need your weapons in there. There's no reason to take them. And what he's doing is he is going inside himself and confronting the shadow self in the cave, which is a dark cave. He eventually confronts Darth Vader, and they fight in the cave, and Luke chops Darth Vader's head off, and his head rolls on the ground. And then the mask, Darth Vader's mask, disintegrates, and it's Luke. So really what he's confronting is himself.
That's so deep.
In that cave. Yeah.
That's so deep. I mean, because I think we have, well, if you talk about the archetypes, right?
Yeah.
We all have, like, think about the person that you despise the most. Like, ultimately, that's just a mirror into your dark, like, your
exactly.
shadow.
Yeah.
I mean, even like everything that was going on with the president, our past, not this one. Well, even if you don't like this one, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whoever you don't like, there is aspects of you there. I mean,
yeah, no, I agree. And that's where, and I talk about that in the book, because that comes in the sin of envy, and looking at somebody else and really, what are you doing there? Right. I mean, you're, in many ways, it is kind of looking at a mirror, right? And seeing your own reflection. And I don't know about you, but I hate my reflection in the mirror. I don't like mirrors as a general rule. But the metaphor of the mirror, of having to really look at yourself, it's what Hamlet tells his mother in Shakespeare's play. Sit down and look at yourself and really look at your soul. Really look at who you are, and that's a frightening thing for us to have to do.
Absolutely. When do you look at yourself? Like, when do you, is it during like meditation? Is it during, I don't know what that looks like for you, but
sometimes it's during meditation. More often than not, though, it's more of that kind of the mystical glimpse that you get every now and then, where over the course of the day, all of a sudden something will happen, or you'll say something, or you'll see somebody do something, and all of a sudden it's just like that poke in the side with a stick that goes, oh, wait a minute, what was that? That didn't feel good. And it's like, well, why didn't that feel good? Well, because that's you, and that bothers you, and you don't like that part of yourself. And so, how are you going to deal with that then? I think, and so that's part of it. Part of it is being aware, is having the awareness. but that's not enough, right? I mean, then you got to do the next step, which is, okay, so now what are you going to do, right? I'm aware, if I'm a jerk, I'm aware of it. But okay, so great, you're aware that you're a jerk. Now what are you going to do, right? I mean, you've got to figure out, how am I going to reconcile with that? Because you're not going to necessarily, and I don't think Jung would argue that you're not necessarily going to stop being a jerk. It's part of who you are. It's maybe part of your shadow self. The point is figuring out how to negotiate with that and reconcile yourself with that so that you can move forward.
Mm-hmm. I think quieting it, that part of you down, right? Like, or being aware of it, like what you're saying, and then kind of being more conscious to it when you're in situations where you might be triggered, where it becomes unconscious reaction.
Sure.
Right? Like when you catch it, being more conscious of it. It's happened to me before where I've been in a situation where someone has said something and I get triggered by that, or I have a response that is unconsciously driven, right? Like I become aware of it. I can catch myself and say, all right, I'm not going to respond in that way again, but I can't catch it every time. Right. But this is the process of being a human. This is us, coming in
growth.
Here. Yeah. It's growth. It's spiritual growth, being aware, and then just kind of working on that and getting better and growing.
But that being aware of the triggers is part of that process, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn, okay, what are the triggers so that I can either avoid them or I can make sure that I'm not falling into that trap.
Sure.
Right. So if the trigger appears, it's like, okay, I recognize that for what it is. I'm not going there. Right. It's like when somebody tries to bait you, right? You're trying to bait yourself in that way, in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can you stop that from occurring?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been reading a lot of energy literature too, and a lot of the trauma that I've been experienced doesn't necessarily have to be like physical trauma, but emotional trauma too.
Oh yeah,
rests in the body, and unless you deal with it or heal with it, it will stay there, right? Because energy it's not created nor destroyed, right? So it will reside somewhere, and most of the time it's in your body. You can see it with diseases and cancer and stress and anxiety and all of that. I won't go into that, but I can tell in my body when I'm experiencing certain types of pains or aches or something like that, that is unlooked at anxiety or stress, or even past traumas, where I've been looking at it more closely through meditation or just kind of mindfulness and seeing what it is that's triggering that, and then trying to heal it and just kind of push it out or just kind of breathe it out of my body. And it's been fascinating work. I feel better. I feel more connected to my body more than ever. And it's allowing me to be more conscious in certain situations where I might be triggered by something. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, trauma is very real. And as you say, we're not just talking about physical trauma. And so, from a Jungian perspective, the argument would be that you also carry the trauma, in some sense, of all human beings who've gone before you, because you're tapped into that collective unconscious. And I started to realize this when I started studying about the Holocaust, that many modern Jews, even if they have no physical connection to the Holocaust, share in the trauma of the Holocaust in some way on that sort of psycho-spiritual level. And that can be very real for certain people. Real for some people more than others. I mean, as a young kid, I mean, and I should say, I mean, I have no family who were involved in the Holocaust. My family came to America before that ever happened, so they were here already. But nonetheless, I can remember growing up as a kid, I didn't even know what the Holocaust was. It wasn't taught in schools like it is now. And I will never forget when I finally realized it. It was when I was in college, because growing up as a kid in the summertime, going around the corner to the bakery, G&R Bakery, to get a rye bread well baked with seeds sliced. I had it memorized. And my mother would send me with, the 25 cents to get the loaf of bread. And when I went in there in the summertime, when it was really hot, this is before every place had air conditioning, the women who worked there would now be wearing short sleeves because it was so warm. And some of them had numbers on their arms. I was like, what the hell is that? I had no idea. And it wasn't until I got to college that I realized they were Holocaust survivors.
Wow.
because it wasn't talked about. That was a trauma which just people carried with them, but really didn't want to discuss. And if you read something like Art Spiegelman's Mouse, right, which is about his own parents, and his father doesn't want to talk about it. Right?
Sure.
He went through hell, and it's not something they want to talk about. That's why Steven Spielberg's oral history project is so important, to try to capture the oral history from these Holocaust survivors who were disappearing at such a great rate as we've gotten further away from that horrific event. But
Viktor Frankl, right? Like, I mean,
Viktor Frankl and Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi, right? I mean, there's Simon Wiesenthal. Yeah, there's a whole series. But I worry that we're experiencing the same thing today again with what's going on in the Ukraine, and we're going to have mass amounts of people who are going to carry the trauma of what they've experienced and what they've gone through, and what we're going to do with that in the future and how they're going to cope with that. Because by all accounts, from what we're hearing, it's just absolutely horrific.
Sure.
And, the families which are being separated. I was listening to something earlier today, and someone was talking about the fact that she was taking in a family in Poland who had just come across the border. But before they came across the border, she had called the people she was going to live with and said, "Can you get this list of items? Because I need to give them to my husband because he has to stay and fight." And it was a list of things like body armor. It was a surreal list. And the reaction was, where the heck is she going to get that? I mean, you can't go to Amazon and order those things. But the reality is those families are being split apart because the men, I originally thought the men weren't leaving because they were staying to fight. And that's actually wrong. They're not allowed to leave. They have to stay. So these families are being split apart, and the mothers are leaving with their children. And I mean, the trauma that's going to be endured by these people. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, like epigenetics, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, we all have the trauma from our parents, from their parents, and it's all in our genetics. I mean,
Right.
It's all there, and it's just waiting for that right environment to be activated, and then it comes out. So it's like anything that we can do to kind of heal that, right, on a conscious level within ourselves. Like when Thich Nhat Hanh talks about us healing ourselves, we're healing them too. So like, yeah, I might not be able to help the healing process of victims in Ukraine, but I can help heal my ancestral healing by taking the time and just really taking in the moment, breathing that in and healing that. And then when I heal that, ultimately we heal ourselves with that, collective unconscious. I mean, it's some deep stuff and people don't really grasp it, but that's the journey, right? Like that's the spiritual path. It is something that is always unfolding. And it's like, you don't know where you're at until you activate something deep inside of your spirit and your soul. And something resonates with you. And it's like, oh, that aha moment, right? Like just reading Thich Nhat Hanh's stuff has really reactivated another aha moment for me, because it takes, I mean, you talk about suffering. I mean, he was exiled for 40 years from Vietnam, where his home, right? And he came to America, the place that they were fighting in the Vietnam, and was talking about peace. And can you imagine being exiled from your home country for 40 years, never being allowed to come back, and like trying to save refugees, and just his mission, right? And he was a advocate for no violence. I mean, his story is remarkable. Yeah.
And his approach to it, which is basically what we now sort of colloquially refer to as mindfulness. Really, that's his whole approach to dealing with all of this, to be more mindful, whether that's being mindful of trauma, or mindful of overeating, or mindful of addiction. It's that mindfulness which for him was going to be the solution. And it's really a genius work.
Mm-hmm. Well, we haven't even talked about your book, Seven Deadly Sins. Like what inspired this book? I know the sins I'm familiar with in Christianity, but I just always thought it was like, the church trying to keep us, in control of the mass almost.
Yeah, I mean, they're actually older than the church. So I mean, the delineation of them as the seven deadly sins is a church invention, but the sins, of course, are older than that, and the idea of them. I mean, the book came about really partially from my effort to try to reconcile my own growth as a kid and what I went through as a kid growing up Jewish and being very devout really as a child. I mean, when I was in elementary school, my teachers thought I was going to be a rabbi. And a colleague several years ago said, well, you are. Rabbi means teacher, and that's what I do. But it's really interesting to be able to go back and think about the various stories and the people that I met and how that then resulted in me setting on the path that I did professionally and also personally. And so some of this was an attempt to kind of just sort all that out. And so the book is not, it isn't a boring academic tome. And so you're not going to hopefully be put to sleep by it. It actually has quite a bit in it that is personal, and it tries then to relate each of the sins, not only to understand them historically, but then to understand how they still are applicable and appropriate to talk about in today's world. Not necessarily in the guise of, well, the church tells you don't do these things because you're going to go to hell, but more in the guise of, well, what does it mean to be greedy today? What does that mean? And it's really, I separate it from religion. It's really talking about these more as, and I think at one point I call them secular sins, right? That we really have transcended thinking about them in the religious context. We don't really think about them in the context of religion much anymore. I mean, we don't think about things like envy as being a religious issue. And so I think that was part of the motivation.
Which would the seven deadly sins do you see in your shadow?
Pride.
Yeah,
I think pride, which is the first one, and pride for even in the Middle Ages, pride was at the root of everything, because pride is the sin that's committed by Adam and Eve in the garden, because they want to be like God, and that is pride, wanting to be bigger, better than you are. And in medieval manuscripts, there's something that shows up in manuscripts called the tree of vices, and it's sort of all of the sins that can be committed, and pride is always the one that's at the trunk. It's the one that starts it all. And I think that is the one that I've struggled the most with in my life, is understanding who I am and what my place is, and not allowing my ego to run away with the show.
But is it so bad to be prideful though?
It isn't. I mean, and that's the curious thing too, because today we tell kids, be proud of yourself, right? I mean, all of these are about excess. So any of these sins, pride, lust, greed, gluttony, all of these, the idea is they're not bad in and of themselves. They're bad in excess. And the point is you have to show moderation. You have to know how to live a life that is the middle way, as the mystics would call it. And that's difficult for us, right? So how much is too much when you're at the all-you-can-eat salad bar, or the all-you-can-eat buffet is probably more likely, right? How much is too much? And our culture has an interesting take on this, right? I mean, one of my favorite things that I ever saw, it's a photo that I have actually hanging up in my office, that I took on a street in Hay-on-Wye in Wales when we were there 25 years ago. We were walking down the street and there was this restaurant. I'll never forget it. We had to walk down a couple steps to go into it. And they had a sign in the window, and it said, there was a price. I think it was like 8 pounds or something. And it said, eat all you like, as opposed to all you can eat. Different approach, right? All you can eat is eat till you burst and you can't move. Eat as much as you like is a very different kind of thinking when it comes to this. And so moderation is the key for all of these. So being prideful, being proud is not a bad thing, right? We want people to be proud of themselves, but it's about knowing when you've crossed the line.
Sure.
And being able to discover about yourself where that line is, because it's different for everybody.
It's funny though, if you go into a buffet when you're hungry, you'll eat the entire buffet. But if you go into a buffet and you're hungry and you mindfully eat, like you take something, a bite of salad or a bite of spaghetti or a bite of something, and like really savor it and like take the time to breathe and connect and eat and taste and get the entire experience, like you eat a fraction of what you might have eaten before.
Oh, definitely. And I've realized that recently because I've struggled with my weight my entire life. And I finally started to realize just recently in the last couple of months about eating moderation and eating smaller portions of things and just being satisfied with what I've got there and not just always thinking about, well, how much can I eat rather than, what do I need? And is that's enough. One of the great mindful exercises, I think it's one of Thich Nhat Hanh's in one of his books on mindful eating, is eating one M&M, right? But really savoring that and tasting it and being aware of the texture and that's mindful eating, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could do that with anything, right? Like really being mindful in this conversation. Like imagine how meaningful our conversations be if you were like fully present in the moment and like really just breathing in and breathing out and sharing that space and like listening to what the other person is saying and seeing where they're coming from, where their experiences may have taken them, where they're coming from. Maybe they're past traumas and that's why they see something in a certain light. Yeah. I mean, we would ultimately probably be less judgmental of other people, really.
Well, it's about focus, right? I mean, if we could focus more on each other when we're engaging with each other, the way you and I are right now, then that's a very different experience. But part of the problem is that we live in a contemporary world that is just determined to spread our attention thin 10 different ways to the wind, right? There was a psychologist several years ago came up with a phrase she called it continuous partial attention. That's really what we're doing. It's continuous partial attention. We never really pay full attention to anything because there's just so much going on, a lot of it with technology, that is difficult. And so we just are continuously paying partial attention. And it's resulted in things like, a generation of kids who have trouble doing sustained reading. I know if I assign reading that's more than 5 pages, a lot of students really struggle to do that because they just can't. That doesn't hold their attention. We live in a world of sound bites.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with. It's weird though the way that I consume information. Like I can read something and get it, but if I listen to it, like YouTube has been a game changer for me. Like I don't need to look at it, but if it's on in the background, if I'm like really fully present in the moment, like I can. Especially with going back to school for me and going back and doing the math portion, the statistics, like I just wish I had this back when I was in high school or college, like just YouTube, just being able to go back and take the reps and just learn it that way. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. We're always looking for the hack. We're always looking for the 10 best ways to enlightenment, 10 best ways to heaven, 10 best ways to manifestation, right? Like I mean, it's always 10 best steps when in actuality it's like just be present, be more present.
We're looking for the easy way, right? I mean, it's a traditional conventional Western approach. Give me the pill, right? Give me the pill that make it better. I don't want to have to do the work. Give me the pill. And so I just, if you can give me the BuzzFeed 10 best ways of spiritual enlightenment, hey, I'm there, give it to me. Right. but that's not what it is. I mean, and you know that. I mean, and that's what Jung is talking about. Is it's a lifelong process, and you may never get there, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
That's why we have reincarnation, right?
Well, if you're going to look at certain traditions, sure. You know, the idea that and the idea that our spiritual existence is just eternal, is going to be here eternally, and you know, is never really going to go away. I mean, the mind body problem is one that is itself really intriguing.
Sure. I could talk to you all night. I just feel like I just don't, not many nights do I have the opportunity to tap the mind of such a decorated doctorate in English and philosophy. So especially when you teach a class in heaven, come on now. But how can people get a hold of you? How can they reach out? How can they find your book?
So my website is davidasolomon.com, and Salomon's Salomon. Unfortunately, I don't have the wisdom of the King Solomon, so I have the A instead of all O's.
What was that story about cutting? What is it? Cutting the children in half.
Cutting the baby in half. Yeah. The two women arguing over whose child it is, and Solomon says, "Well, we'll solve this. We'll cut the baby in half." And that's when the mother actually comes forward and says, "No, wait," and that proves that she's the real mother, right? She says, "Let her have him," and she's like, "Oh, so you must be the real mother." And the wisdom of Solomon. Unfortunately, I don't have it, but so it's davidasolomon.com, and my website there has links to my blog and all my publications and my podcast appearances, including this terrific one, and folks can contact me through there. And if you purchase the book and you'd like it signed, just contact me, and I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Before we go, last question. What's your favorite bookstore?
Ooh, today or all time?
Today, right now. Like
today
right now.
Ooh, today is hard. I would say right now in the US, it's got to be the Strand, downtown in New York. I mean, that's still, I mean, there's so few left of bookstores just in general. So the Strand probably in the US. In the UK, if you get the chance to go to Hay on Wye, it is the town of books. It's a town of bookstores. It's an incredible place. And that's just an amazing place. But it's, you know, I'm cheered by the fact that bookstores seem to be trying to make a comeback, but it's going to be very difficult.
I love the ones that are just like very off the beaten path, like just out of nowhere, just go in there and see what's in there, you know?
The little hole in the wall.
And you walk in, you can automatically smell like the history in that place. You know,
and usually I can walk into those kinds of places, and just when you walk in, you either get the vibe or you don't, right? It's like, okay, this is for me, or you know, this is not the right place.
Well, I went to a new age. I went to a new age one, right? And it's my first time in a new age one. I didn't burn when I walked in there either. So I walked in the door and I was like, man, like I walked, you know, they had all the cool crystals and incense and all that. I walk back to one of the corners. I'm like reading some of the titles. I'm like, man, this is awesome. Then I went to the other side of the house and I was like, I need to get out of here. This side, not so much. This side's really cool. Dr. Salomon, this has been awesome. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Great conversation.